Welcome back. It's Blood Bowl League of Blood Bowl. The season is over. And my name's Thomas, by the way, in case I wasn't too familiar. We're going to take a look at what happened this season and do a little recap of what happened during the playoffs. In case it wasn't super obvious, Mark won it all. Mark beat Andrew pretty handily. Links to both these games will be up here if you haven't seen them already. And then I beat the Skaven team in a huge, ridiculous slog. It's a very long game, but it's a very good game. I recommend checking that out. And also my finals match against Mark did not go very well. Mark basically walked all over me early on due to some bad luck and poor positioning on my part. And from there, he was just able to control the tempo of the game from there on out. So, bunch of really good games to end the season with. A very, very good season for the most part. So, like I said, we're going to talk about what happened. We're going to talk about who I thought did the best. We're going to talk about final team composition and all that fun stuff. Then we'll go through the Hall of Fame and everything great. So, yeah, like I said, Mark won it all. Congrats to Mark. Let's take a look at Mark's team. We're going to level up on this thrower at the very end of it. He bought a reroll, he bought a cheerleader, thanks to me buying a reroll and all that stuff. Mark performed very, very well. Statistically, Mark performed the best out of any team across the board. Overall performance was extremely good. He managed to lead the league in kills per game, and overall kills, he tied with me for total number of kills, but he has the best kills per game ratio. He topped the league in defense. Very few touchdowns were scored against him, only 11 total. Best average per game as well. And, he didn't really place that highly in too many other categories, has to be said. He had the fewest dead players, which is something. He had one of the best defensive ratios, also did pretty well overall in terms of number of touchdowns scored, amount of passing he did, amount of running yards, which kind of correlates to best high number of touchdowns being played. Had the third best injuries in the league and the second most KOs in the league. So Mark's team did very, very well. Incredibly well, in fact. We're going to talk about, so just to talk about format here, we're going to go through each team, talk about how they did overall, and then we're going to do some Hall of Fame overall discussions, that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about here MVPs as well for each team, and MVP has got to be Dean. No question about it. Obviously, all this SPP is there for a reason. One SPP away from level 5, too. It's a little heartbreaking for him. But as you can see, he just did a lot. 6 touchdowns, managed to do a catch, killed 3 people, injured 11, KO'd 12. Just a ridiculous number of things happened. He ran a good amount, second highest on Mark's team, which correlates, obviously, this high number of touchdowns. One thing I should say about MVPs, too, I'm not going to count dead players because the game doesn't track dead players, so it's hard for me to know who did what, essentially. Other fun facts about Mark's overall performance here. Very weighted to running, despite having throwers. Not having any natural receivers will really help that. Even though he had those 4 agility goblins, he really didn't use them. He definitely passed a bit. He just didn't really do a lot with it. The third highest passing in the league was not really saying that much, considering he was still half of the second place in terms of overall passing. So there is that. Let's see here. Any other fun stuff to talk about for Mark? Not really. Mark's season was pretty much all hinged around getting Dean early. He didn't really encounter any problems. He certainly lost a few games early on. Here, let's flip this around so it's a little more chronological. We tied early on, but he, got a fair amount of wins early on. Ran into some trouble about mid-season where he lost a few, mostly to the Skaven team. But overall, he just kind of coasted through, maintained a relatively good record, and then was able to use his very well-developed team to make it into the playoffs. He's got a lot of tackle, which was key in this league. He's got block. He's got a little wrestle. Got tackle and wrestle on this person. Disturbing Presence Goblin was very good for stopping handoffs, at least in the later part of the season. He was mentioning to me that he would have gotten Disturbing Presence earlier had he known how good it is, which I think is a pretty good use of a Goblin. And then, just all of these blocking skills made these 7 pieces really, really good, especially Dean in particular. So, combination of good early fortune and not losing a lot of players definitely helped. Defending very well and limiting overall touchdowns against is also very key. Part of that is the league didn't have too many high-scoring teams aside from Wood Elf and Skaven, and even then, this team's fast enough to keep up with both those teams and put a lot of pressure on them. So it's one of those things where Mark has really developed really quickly and did a really good job with maneuvering his pieces. So good job for Mark for winning. I came in second overall, obviously. My MVP, I don't know if there's any question about it. It's got to be Dr. Broken Mirror with block and guard. Didn't score any touchdowns, but just the sheer amount of hitting that Dr. Broken Mirror did allowed Wishbone to really jump his way to victory and score almost all my touchdowns, but he did a lot. Without question, though, without Dr. Friday the 13th, I wouldn't have anywhere near the luck. And a big part of that was getting block. He didn't get any skills for a long time, but as soon as he got block, things really shot up for him really, really quickly. So that's what that is. Statistically, how'd my team do? I have the second highest amount of touchdowns in the league by 1. I beat Mark's overall total by 1. I had 21, he had 20. On an average basis, though, I actually fall behind Mark. I scored 1.4 touchdowns per game compared to the 1.43 of Mark, so I don't even make the top 3 for that one. I had the second highest amount of running yards total in the game, but on a average basis, I actually have the 4th highest. I'm trying to remember what else I did really well. Tied for most number of kills overall, came in second for on average kills per game. I had the highest number of tackles on a raw data basis, but had the lowest number, or I had a second highest in terms of averages. Let's see. Failed dodges, I was the 3rd most successful person in terms of dodging away. Hooray for Stunty plus dodge, being a big deal there. There's statistics. I had the 3rd best overall defense of only 18 touchdowns scored against, although 4th for the per game ratio of 1.2 touchdowns scored against. I forgot to mention for Mark as well. His removed lost players. Mark had the 2nd best ratio for players removed versus players lost. He removed 1.18 players for every player he lost, which is really, really good. Not too surprising given the other hitting, but as far as I did, I didn't do very good. I did okay. I came in 4th here as well. 0.73 players removed for every player lost. Some of that's stunty, some of that's due to the way that the secret weapons work. Some of that's due to Dr. Friday the 13th really hitting hard, but overall, like looking at my statistical performance, I didn't do very well. I only lost 2 players. It was the same player, actually, poor Coogan's Bluff here. But statistically, I did the worst overall in terms of leading in categories. I had the lowest total overall performance in like weighting the things. So like I gave a lot of some random points for how well you did in each category. 3 points for first, 2 points for second, and 1 point for third. And if you total all my overall performances up, I come in dead last. Overall, statistically, I did terrible. So it's kind of funny that I ended up second, and kind of a thing where statistics are fun, but don't necessarily indicate how well a team performed necessarily. And I wasn't that far behind in a lot of categories. I'm 4th in a lot of these categories. Just isn't enough to work with that totaling spectrum. So maybe I could change that up a little bit, but for the most part, it wouldn't change things too dramatically. So interesting thing for me, at least. In terms of my overall game performance, kind of not a lot to say. I did really not that great looking at the early season here. I lost more games than I won, and then I managed to pull it together in no small part thanks to this string of wins here. Basically won 4 matches in a row up to the finals match where I lost to Mark, but that's basically it. And everyone else's overall ranking was close enough where that gave me the edge right at the end. So it was a weird season for me. I didn't do that great. I feel like I handled the goblins as well as I could, but I mentioned this in the finals, but I'm really glad to be done. I ended up with -1 M.A. Looney, who I fired and replaced. Honestly, though, I think the biggest thing is I didn't really have a lot of big losses. No real permanent injuries aside from like niggling injuries on a Bombardier, which who cares. This is the first like major one I've gotten that wasn't an outright kill. It's kind of the same story as Mark, because I didn't lose too much early on, and I won enough money anyway where I was just able to sit on a ton. I did end up buying a 4th reroll, which I might regret a little bit because it gave Mark his 4th reroll plus a cheerleader, so who knows, it's hard to say. So yeah, not too bad for me. Let's take a look at our 3rd place team, the team that looked for all intents and purposes to be winning it all. That is the Skaven team, Warren's the One Cheese, piloted by Greyduck. This team was a beast all season. Absolutely unstoppable. You can see all these player SPP, all this SPP, all these levels is a good sign of what happened. I mean, me injuring a lot of these people doesn't help anything, but still. This team suffered a little bit. 3 players dead and a couple fired just due to bad injuries, like minus agility and stuff like that. But overall, you know, not too, kind of the same thing. They got a lot of points early on and then managed to just kind of dominate from there. Gutter runners are really good, and this team had a lot of scoring power and got pretty lucky in terms of overall damage and early success, leading to a big snowball. MVP for this team is Danbo Driver. Worked a while on figuring out who the best person would be on this team, because it's hard to tell, but if you look at Danbo's stats overall, he kind of jumps ahead of his other gutter runner brethren because he has 7 touchdowns, received 6 passes, and still managed to put some injuries in. So, while not as many as, say, this Blitzer here, or, you know, the Rat Ogre, 2-2 is pretty good. This thrower did some pretty good damage as well, but overall, in terms of raw power and total team contribution, I think it has to go to Danbo. There's not really any question in my mind. Other fun things for the Skaven team. The Skaven team obviously had the most touchdowns by a huge margin, 38 touchdowns scored in total. Not too surprising as well to see that they had the best overall running game with over 1,000 yards of running. Second most injuries in the league, and that's kind of what we talked about before, that the Skaven team got very, very lucky. She had loaded injury dice, I guess, but tons of damage to put in. Managed to get only 1 kill all season, but injured a ton of people. 3rd highest KOs, had the 3rd best tackling rate, had the 2nd lowest amount of failed dodges, and the 2nd fewest touchdowns against in terms of raw numbers. If we look at averages, highest touchdowns in running game, it doesn't even matter. 2nd highest injury, all that stuff stays the same pretty much, except she slips to 3rd in terms of overall touchdowns scored against, with 0.93 touchdowns scored against per game. So not too shabby whatsoever. Trying to think of anything else here. Not a lot to say here. 0.84 removed players for every player lost, which is pretty good considering the Skaven team is a big pile of squish. So she did extremely, extremely well. Definitely relied on her running and passing game, though. She's totally unbalanced in that regard. Basically, 1 yard run, 1.23 yards run for every yard of passing per game, 17 yards run for every yard pass this season. That's pretty out of whack. It's more than, it's almost more than double the next worst teams in terms of imbalance for that. In terms of overall, like I said, just a big snowball here. She went undefeated until the very, very end. This huge column of W's is a testament to that. Got really lucky early on in terms of being able to get a ton of touchdowns and still put in a ton of injuries, and just able to snowball from there. Won enough money to stay afloat, and the team reflects that. I mean, I'm shocked I beat her, to be honest. It was a hard game, too. But this team, not too bad. She was mentioning to me that her season looked a lot like this team's a bunch of Packer jokes, Packers from the NFL, that her season is just like the 2011 season for the Packers, in that they went undefeated forever and then were defeated in the playoffs. Interestingly, by the 4th place seed team, which happened to be me this season, but a little bit of symmetry there, although in that season, the team that knocked them out went on to win everything, whereas I managed to choke at the finals. So, what can you do? All right, let's look at 4th place. This is the Wood Elf team. Andrew just ate so much. This team is in a very sad state, as you can tell. Very, very injured. Lots of players dead. Not a lot of money to talk about here. MVP. For this one, there's not really a lot of choices here since I don't take into account dead players, but even if I did, I don't think it would matter too much. This plus movement allowance word answer did pretty much everything, which is sort of how Wood Elves play. 3 casualties, 4 KOs, 8 touchdowns, a bunch of passes and catches, tons of yards running. Just the word answer did everything, which is kind of the problem I think the Wood Elf team has in general. But that said, Andrew had a pretty rough season, I gotta say. Ended up with being tied for the most number of players lost with 5 players dead. In terms of touchdowns, had the 3rd highest touchdowns though. Had the highest raw number of passes. 2nd in terms of averaging. Statistically, this team did great. Although it falls just short of the podium in terms of overall statistical performance. Skaven team came in 2nd on that, I should mention. Just defended pretty well too. 11 touchdowns scored against, ties for the Underworld team in terms of overall raw numbers, 0.85 in terms of the averages there, but still very, very good in terms of all that. Very successful at moving the ball. Just lost so many players though. Let's see here. Had the 2nd highest in terms of players removed. Behind me, with 105 players, Angel lost 102 players to casualties, deaths, and KOs this season. And that's kind of reflecting in this team's current beaten up state. All this 7 really added up, and Andrew plays a very risky version of this team, so that's how things goes. In terms of how his season went, it started out looking pretty good, and then things went south very quickly. I think really, if I had to put something on these couple weeks here, just ate a ton of casualties these few weeks here. This week, no, but just didn't have a good time several weeks in a row. And that really, you can see from his winnings too, he rolled pretty well early on, but these players are also very expensive that it's hard to get anywhere with that. He did manage with 3 rerolls and an apothecary, but this team used to have 2 throwers at one point. It still has 2 throwers. Used to have a lot more linemen at one point. He also made a decision to not buy a lot of players in the interim. He didn't really have the money for it, so I can kind of understand that. But just these few weeks here of not a lot of money, and then having that followed by, making a lot of money, but sustaining a ton of injuries, really crippled this team. The early performance certainly gave him the advantage, and Elf bullshit is still real, so he's able to make it into the playoffs. But once there, Marcus will take him apart by just having a more developed team in terms of overall blocking. We'll see. I also get the impression that this wasn't necessarily Andrew's team. He mentioned in his game against Mark that while he appreciated the 4 agility, he didn't feel like the Elf team did what he wanted it to do, which, again, I think it may be a playstyle difference here. Wood Elves are obviously a very good team, but they can be hard to manage. And if you get a little unlucky in a very short season, like we have here, there's not really a lot you can do about it. Other things you can mention about the Wood Elf team. Again, very, very, very good defense. Not surprising to have the 3 top teams having the best overall touchdowns scored versus against. Andrew did great, 1.82 overall touchdowns scored for every touchdown scored against. Had a very good passing game, actually. The 3rd best average yards run for every yards passed. He did good. Not a lot to say here whatsoever. Trying to think if there's any other statistics that are worth mentioning for this team. Not really. I mean, again, he did very well, but a big part of that is he did really well on moving the ball. Actually, he had 2 interceptions, which is tied for the most in the league. But just overall, while moving the ball very well is something this team did, he couldn't stand up in terms of injuries. Both offensively and defensively, just ate too many injuries and didn't deal enough in return. I think that's probably the best thing. 0.33 players removed for every player lost. That is the worst performance in the league overall. And I think that's probably the biggest measure for what happened with this team. Yeah, what can I say? So, Andrew did good overall, and I think Wood Elves are definitely still a very good team. By the way, this video is going to be long, if that wasn't obvious already. Let's take a look at some of the other teams here. Let's take a look at the almost to the playoffs Chris, who probably would have made it in had I not scooted ahead and beaten him that one game in the second to last week. This team was a terrifying monster of doom. All the ogres, tons of rerolls, just really, really scary team. In terms of best overall player, this one I decided it was Tharg. Reason for that is he had 2 touchdowns and had a ridiculous amount of injuries. I could see making the argument that Gregor technically did a little bit more in terms of overall injury damage, but I think casualties are better than KOs, and just 2 touchdowns is better than 1 touchdown. That's kind of all there is to it. And you can't give it to a Snotling. So there you go. Yeah, Gregor. It did good. But Thargs with block and guard did a lot. Guard is a very good thing for this team to pick up. And once you get this skill 2, definitely helped. Let's see. Not surprising statistics is that the Ogre team dominated the injuring field. Highest number of injuries by 11 with 42. Highest number of KOs by 7 with 60 KOs dealt. Second highest tackles in the league overall with 46 tackles. Lowest number of dodge fails, which I think is more due to the fact that Stun People's Titchy, and then the Ogre's doing really good on dodging away. Only 7 failed dodges all season. Lowest number of casualties overall, despite having the Snotlings. 63 casualties, that's in KOs sustained. So that's pretty good. Where he failed, though, was moving the ball. 10 touchdowns total scored, 1 catch all season. That's just a ball getting kicked to him. Not a lot of running. 21 touchdowns scored against. Yeah, I think he had... he had the 5th highest touchdown scored against, but that's about it. But player removal, absolutely the best. 1.68 players removed for every player lost. And that's with the Snotlings, so he removed half a player more than the second place team, which was the Underworld team, and he removed double the players for every player lost that the Skaven team did. So just absolutely crushed it. Even on averages, nothing really changes the team. In fact, it gets better. He has the highest number of tackles in terms of overall averaging, although he has the second best players lost, casualties, deaths, and KOs compared to the Underworld team if we look at things sustained. Other factors, tied for third with 3 players lost all season to deaths, so not too bad for him. Anything else really notable? Not really. It's an Ogre team. You're going to expect them to hit. They don't move the ball very well, and that's exactly what happened here. In terms of what happened for this entire season, you can see just a lot of losses posted, but then as soon as the skills started to kind of run in, that's when damage started to hit. Kind of starting from me and then moving forward from there. While he did lose, he started tying more games. This is a forced tie, but won against Andrew's team last minute and was in very good position to make it into the playoffs until we met and I beat him 5-0, and that was the end of that. So basically he had the same kind of season I did. A little bit worse overall performance early on, but managing to kind of pick it back up at the end, but just not quite enough in time. It's an Ogre team. Much like the Goblins, are not a super serious team, and Chris did very, very well with them, despite taking things like diving tackle, which I criticized a lot, but turned out to be pretty impactful. I'm shocked. I wouldn't have picked it, but it turned out to be pretty good. So yeah, not too bad. I guess it makes a lot of sense, too, if you can think about the amount of dodging that was done in this league. Having diving tackle means that when people try to dive away, there's a chance they won't, and there you go. So, not too bad whatsoever for the Ogre team. If we look at our 6th place team here, that would be the other Goblin team, Goblins Boys. Gave MVP to Hide Vomit. Hide Vomit got it because there weren't a lot of touchdowns scored by this team, and while he didn't score any touchdowns, he posted a ton of casualties. 10 casualties, 7 KOs, 2 kills. Hide Vomit kind of did it all. And that's just with break tackle, so, what can you say? This team actually looks really good, aside from this -1 strength troll and the -1 MA Pogor, who you would just fire and replace. I don't know. Scott Goblin played a much different kind of Goblin team than I did. He was very much big plays, big aggression. Sometimes it paid off, sometimes it didn't. Statistically, anything of note for this team? Actually had the third highest passing, both in terms of raw yards passed and in terms of average yards passed per game. Big part of that is, one, there's not a lot of passing in this league, and two, he threw his goblins a lot. Had the highest number of interceptions in terms of per game, and also had 2, which is the same number that Wood Elves had, which is extremely impressive considering he's using that for agility. Let's see here. Third highest kills per game with 3, 0.27 kills per game. Third highest injuries, not too bad there in terms of an average amount. Basically 2 injuries per game here. Actually didn't lose that many players overall, shockingly enough. 74 total casualties, death, KOs throughout the whole season. It's 6.73 averaged out, so not too bad in all honesty. But when he did lose, he lost big things, like this troll getting -1, penalty, this Pogor getting killed. I don't know, he only lost 2 players in terms of the whole season overall, which is kind of incredible for the same reason it's incredible I didn't lose a lot, especially because he was chucking so many of his dudes. It just, I don't know. It's really hard to pin down everything that went wrong for this team. Good mix of running and passing, thanks to all the throw teammates. Beat me in terms of overall statistical performance. Second worst in the league, but still beat me. Yeah, it's very strange. If you look at an average for players lost for players removed, does pretty okay, actually. Comes in 4th with 0.7 players removed for every player lost. It just, things kind of coalesced around some bad moments, and then wasn't able to offensively capitalize. We take a look at his match record chart. Bunch of losses just posted up early on. Only 7 touchdowns scored all season, too, is kind of indicative of this. He just did not really do a lot with everything. Sisley did just fine. He definitely injured a lot of people, especially towards the end, but just wasn't able to ever stop any of the big offensive drives against Skaven or Wood Elves. Got a freak win against Mark, which was pretty funny. That game was great. Just, nothing really added up for this team, I guess is what it is. And that's kind of how Goblins go. When things go well, they go great, but if the ball gets away from you, things get out of control. Even if you're keeping players on the pitch, and even if you're removing people, you can still fall behind in overall scoring. And that seems to be what happened for this team. Didn't do great, didn't do the best. It's Goblins. What can you do? So, there we go. We're skipping Chaos just to talk, because they weren't really a factor after they left the season. But let's talk about Amazons. Sid came in last here. Big part of that was a lot of bad luck. Sid had the tied for most players killed, which is 5. He lost 5 people total. But Sidisly did great. He had the best average passing once he got everything going. Loves his pass play and did a great job of it. 20 passes overall, 27 catches, which is bouncing balls, kickoffs, all that fun stuff. Highest number of passing yards. Has the best ratio of running to passing overall. 2.36 yards run for every yard pass. Just phenomenal. It didn't do so great in terms of player losses. He beats Andrew for players lost, but just barely. 80 players lost for the Amazon team, 102 players lost for the Wood Elf team. Average of 7.27 players removed for the Amazon team, which is slightly worse than me and slightly better than the Wood Elf team. I lost 7 players per game to casualties and KOs. Statistically, comes in 5th in terms of overall category performance, and that's just dominating all these passing categories. Just really moved the ball well eventually. I think a big part of this was not being super familiar. This was Sid's first season. He wasn't super familiar with the rules, and had a lot of bad luck really early on. Should mention MVP before we get too far away here. I gave it to... Is it this one? Yes, Tepsil Pile Barkita. All right, default names. 2 touchdowns scored, a good amount of throwing despite not having, and catching for not having any skills for it, and put up a lot of injuries. 2 injuries, 4 KOs. Did great. This team doesn't have a lot of people, though, because they lost 5. I feel like that's kind of the biggest thing. Nothing happened early on for this team. That's really when the Amazons would have done good. As people started to get more skills, nothing really happened. I mean, he didn't post a... doesn't have a real win all season here. This is the forced win. Has a couple good ties in here. Some of these are forced ties as well. But just kind of got beat by everybody. And I think, again, a big part of that was he lost so much early on. Didn't make a ton of money whatsoever to replace his admittedly very cheap players, but when they go, they go. He lost blitzers a bunch, is still missing a blitzer. Biggest thing I think is it's very clear Sid wanted to play a passing team, and Amazons can pass the ball, but they're not that good at it. This thrower has sure hands now, but picking up the ball is still very hard for them. Before that, I think this wasn't Sid's team. He got very unlucky, and he ate a ton of injuries. You can see all these red numbers here. Just nothing was able to really happen for this team, and I feel like next season he'll do better. Better knowledge of the rules, a team that's more suited to his play style, and is a little more resilient will probably be the way to go. We'll see what happens for Sid, but he's got his passing down, and those skills will move forward depending on what team he takes. So they take an elf team. He mentioned he's interested in playing humans, though, which can pass the ball just fine. In the same way that the Amazons can. In fact, they can do it better because their catches are faster, and their throwers have short hands. So, yeah. I'm excited to see where Sid goes. I'm really surprised this team wasn't as much of a factor as they could have been. Biggest thing, like though, just not getting tackle, or not getting anything and then getting tackled to death eventually. Anything else to mention over Sid's team? I don't think so. I think that's it. So let's quick talk about the Chaos team, just in brief here. I've kept them kind of up to date because I had to in order to play them. This team started with no rerolls, and pretty much didn't play anything past, let's see here. Yeah, anything past week 4 didn't happen for this team. Oh yeah, he had a rock that one game. So despite that, this team is very scary. I wish he'd stuck around because he could have played block on the Minotaur, block on a bunch of warriors, could have gotten claw. This Beastman has +1 agility and block. This Beastman's pro, which is funny. This, whatever, we'll ignore that. Wrestle on this one. I mean, this team could have been something very, very scary. It just didn't quite happen. So sad to see that he mailed out. But something to think about in terms of what could have been for the Chaos team and what would have been interesting to have. Probably would have stopped the Skaven team a little earlier. Maybe would have threatened the Ogre team a little bit. Maybe would have messed me up a little bit. Whatever. He's not coming back next season either, so nothing to worry about really. But just kind of an interesting little footnote there. Okay. Let's get into the Hall of Fame. It's fun to look at everything. Most experienced player goes to Dean. Playing that extra game helps. 50 SPP, almost level 5. Agonizingly close. Beat out the Super Blitzer or Super Gutter Runners for the Skaven team. Best touchdowns still go to these two teams. I'm really pumped that Wishbone is on here. That's pretty good. Not too surprising to see this mostly dominated by the Skaven team and the Wood Elf team. And yeah, I mean, Mark is on here and I'm on here because we played a lot. Okay, let's get back into it. Best throwing. See, this is what I'm talking about. I think Sid's got his throwing game down. He has the best throwing overall. Not even close. He's totally dominating this entire section. Wood Elf is on here too, which makes sense because the Wood Elves had the second best throwing overall. Interceptions. I'm really sad this wasn't just one troll. That would have been great, but what can you do? Only 4 this season. I think that's more of a product of not many people passing, but we had more last season, and we had fewer games, so that's kind of funny. Most injuries. Dean crushing it here. Hide Vomit with 10. Ogres, Dr. Friday the 13th, who just shot up here. Ogre. Makes sense given how well they dominated. Best runner. Yes, Wishbone kept it by a huge margin. There wasn't really any chance in the matter. I think playing those 8 extra turns gave him a lot of extra boost as well. But overall, not too surprising to see the Skaven team primarily being the team on here. They ran the ball the most, so no huge shock there. Interesting to have an Amazon player on here. And like I said, I'm really sad that Sid's season went so badly, because it feels like he could have done really well had he been a little luckier on his injury dice. Best throwing, again, he's got us throwing down. Threw a lot with not throwers as well. Yeah. A couple players throwing for the various teams that can throw teammate. Survivor means nothing. Oh, I guess arguably, Mark and I will be the most up here because we played, they lasted 16 weeks basically. Best killer Dean by a huge number. Hide Vomit with 2, and then it's a kind of a fight between the Ogre team and me. Best receiver goes to Dance's Revolution, and these are the teams that threw, basically, so it makes sense that they'd all be on here. MVP overall, best player goes to Dean. You can kind of get that in how many categories he's in terms of where he is. Like, he's present in almost every single Hall of Fame category, and he just did the most. So Dean is our overall best player of the league. Yeah. I think that's the only other thing for this season. No, that's not true. One other statistic I wanted to mention for sure was my prediction accuracy. Last season, I got 43.75% of my predictions correct. Big part of that was me not willing to say tie. This season, I learned my lesson. And even though we had fewer games per week, we had more games overall. It's whatever. 65.91% in my prediction accuracy. Yes, I did really well. Next season, I'm hoping to do 70% or better. That sounds possible. Sure. Constant improvement, right? At least better than to this season. Season 3 is going to be starting up a couple weeks. We're scheduled to start at the end of the last week in October 27th. So you'll start seeing content around then. Teams are due the Wednesday before on the 22nd, so we'll probably have a preview video before that. If we get everybody's team in, we might start early. We'll see. But it should be good. Teams talked about. We've got a lot more passing. We've got Elf for me. Mark is going to play Kemry. We've got... Who else is locked in? We got a Dwarf team from one of our new players. We have a Lizard team for one of our new players. We'll have 2 new people, if that wasn't clear. So that's pretty good. 6 players will be continuing on. Any other committed players? Andrew's making noise about Vampire, which should be pretty fun. Heard some noise about Necro, Orc, High Elf, Skaven again. Chris is mentioning maybe he'll play the passing version of the Skaven team, so that should be interesting as well. Should be a good mix of teams, though. Good mix of hitting, scoring, kind of in between. Should be fun. So, thanks for watching, everybody. It was a really good season. I picked up a random subscriber that I don't know, so thanks, random subscriber. Yeah, we'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.